Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's so great to be here with you tonight. As Lee's just said, my name is Kat Lavers, and I also want to acknowledge that I'm on Wurundjeri country tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Aboriginal people have and continue to farm and garden on this continent. There are many well-documented examples now, and one that I find particularly inspirational is the Butch Bim eel aquaculture site in Western Victoria. It's just one example of the real depth of knowledge that Aboriginal people use to redesign their landscape to provide more abundant, resilient food sources year round, and to do that in a way that was really quite sustainable for thousands of generations. So incredible heritage that we have here in this country. Tonight we're going to look at a much smaller, maybe less impressive scale, but really focus in on how to design a home garden. Myself, I'm a small space food production specialist and a permaculture designer, and my real passion is helping people just get a really good overview of their site and put things in the right place from the beginning. Because what can happen is, as gardeners, we're often so keen to get really stuck in. We might pick up a plant at a nursery, or, we just want to get stuck in digging holes and growing things. But the thing is, if we rush into that, then sometimes we miss opportunities, we waste materials, we make sometimes expensive mistakes. So where I think the real value is having a concept design. So you actually got things in the most optimal arrangement. And I'm saying optimal because, of course, there's no perfect garden design, and things are shifting and changing in our lives, and we'll learn things about the site as we go on. So it's really just finding the most optimal arrangement that we can. But yeah, actually having that from the start is a massive advantage. So by doing that, we can enjoy our gardens more. If we're food gardeners, we can also generally harvest more as well. So there are real tangible benefits to getting the design right. And so whether you're on a small scale, like a little balcony, or in a larger backyard, this session is just about that design process. I've chosen to sort of feature an example that's a more, I suppose, traditional, but what's average is changing out there. But I've got a more kind of larger garden design that I'm going to step you through as an example. The steps, though, in the design process are the same, regardless of whether you're on a little balcony or renting or in a larger design. So what we'll do tonight is go through the design process that I use professionally, working with households and working with community gardens. And it involves things like having a bit of a plan, a vision, a wish list at the start, setting yourself up with a good base map, going through a site analysis process, and then starting to think about everything you want in that design and what might be some clever connections that we can make between them. And then finally pulling that all together in the concept design. What we won't be able to do tonight is go into lots and lots of detail on every element because that presentation would be about 9, 10 hours long. Nobody's here for that. But I will give you some thoughts on the things I think about when placing elements that are quite common in sustainable gardens. So things like a habitat garden, a veggie patch, fruit trees, pergolas, chickens, that kind of thing. So I hope that sounds like a worthwhile use of your time. I'm going to start off. I think I just thought I would start by showing you a couple of pictures of my place. So this is when I first moved in. Um, Pretty small, I guess, little urban pocket. Soil was not very good, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. And this is what it's come to be like these days. So I suppose the message is that it doesn't take that long to create a garden like this. And while we're going to spend quite a bit of time investing in site analysis, once you've got your plan, really you can set up a garden and have even mature cropping fruit trees in about 4 or 5 years. So it's a quick transition if you put your mind to it. And this excitement of having a productive garden in our climate is that we can produce food all year round. So having, for example, the garden in the right spot so that you catch those precious winter sun rays enables us to have these fantastic yields in our climate, where there's no time of year we can't be harvesting fresh produce from outside. So, with that in mind, I also wanted to tell you just a little bit about like the training that I've had, and I use something called permaculture as my basis for doing design. There's quite a wide range of understandings of the term and even definitions. The one that I use is permaculture is an ethically based design framework to evolve systems that protect and restore ecological health while also providing for human needs. And just to unpack that very quickly, permaculture gives us a set of ethics, which most people will relate to, as they're quite common in most people's own ethics. Earth care, people care, and fair share. And then we have a set of principles as well that are some of which are on the screen. The ethics really help us guide us towards things that are in our shared interests. And then the principles will take lessons from systems that have lasted for a very, very long, long time in nature and traditional ways of organizing things. And then those ethics and principles come together in a design process that helps us really think about things in the right order and make clever connections so that we're not wasting our time or effort or resources. Anyway, I sometimes run permaculture design courses that are a 2 week long course, but tonight I'm just going to go through the absolute essence of the design process for you in less than 2 hours. It's a nice challenge. So I'm going to do this with the help of an example, and I've reached back into the archives to actually a friend's house where they agreed that I could use it for teaching purposes. And they decided to call their place Mulberry House for reasons that will become obvious in a minute. And I thought maybe just so you can see the context that I would actually give you some footage from the site. When I do a design visit, one of the first things I'll do is just pop outside and have a quick look. So I'll get a first impression of the site and also just notice my feelings and which areas I feel like I want to spend time in, where I don't want to spend time. So using your body as a bit of an indicator, giving you information, which we often then use later on in the design. So come and join me on a little walk to Mulberry House in Coburg. Well, firstly, we're going to just soar above it for a minute. I've pulled up some aerial photographs so you can get your bearings. North is to the top of your screen. So we've got a west-facing front garden and a kind of east-facing back garden, if you like. And you can sort of see the flow where you'd walk in the driveway there and then you pop around the back and then you're in this garden space. One of the things with aerial photography is we can also look up wintertime photos if you've got the right subscription. So here's a winter photo showing the extent of shading. And just for fun, let's just go back and have a look where the veggie patch was when they moved in. And if you can see my mouse, it's just tucked up in this northern boundary there. So yeah, sadly, the previous owners had not done a garden concept design workshop because it's not impossible, but a pretty tough place to be growing crops in the winter when you're not catching any direct sun at all. Anyway, moving on. I'm going to show you a video of the back garden. So you are just along the southern fence boundary, and we're going to pan around the back of the house and then to the north and then to the east. That's your mulberry there in the middle. Ending with a fig on the fence line there. So we're just getting our bearings. We'll skip through there. So this is the wall of the house that faces east. It's very bright at a sunny day, I might say that. It was cloudy when I took these pictures, obviously, but that is one hell of a reflective wall there on a bright sunny day. Uh, Also looking out through the sort of the house windows to look out into the garden. This is the view. There's quite a straggly quince tree there and some arum lilies. The mulberry, the reason why they decided to name their house Mulberry House is the weeping mulberry here. And then we've got an ornamental pear in the background there, really gorgeous, large deciduous tree. The veggie patches again, just against that south-facing wall. Um, and then that's the sort of pocket underneath the ornamental pear tree, which looks a bit dull in the middle of winter, but gee, just a gorgeous shady pocket in the summer there. Um, the southern fence line, the fence was to be repaired when this photo was taken. You just kind of look out over the fence and just notice that direction, and that, yeah, it's a little bit of yeah, evidence of strong wind that they get from that direction. And then this is the front garden that we'll just have a quick look at. Okay, so once again, just so you can place all those images, yep, you've got your mulberry in the center, slightly north of center in the garden, the large ornamental pear. Fig tree is just tucked in the southeastern corner near the shed. Yep, and that's the layout. Was going to say, actually, as we go through, should you have any questions for me tonight, yeah, feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will actually try and read them as I go. I might miss some, but yeah, you can pop them in if there's anything you're curious about along the way. Okay, so the first step in our design is to stop thinking about the individual plants that we want to put in and just step back and think about what this garden is all about. So the question that we need to answer here is, why do you want this garden? The reason why that's important is that everybody wants a garden for slightly different reasons, and they will have quite dramatic implications on what the garden is, what it looks like. We get exposed to lots of gardens on TV, on the internet, in magazines, things like that, but they're all other people's gardens. So you've got to remember, what do you want about this garden? So, for example, do you want to teach kids where food comes from? That can be a very, very small garden indeed. Um, or are you like me? You want to try and grow as much fresh food as possible so that your food costs stay down. That probably is going to be quite an extensive garden to achieve that goal. For some of us, it's more just about taking a break from busy work lives and having somewhere that you can sit in nature and feel connected and relax. Some of us are really passionate about restoring habitat for wildlife. It might be a need for a relaxed play area and social activities in the garden. So, whatever it is, and actually, if you feel like playing along at home, type in the chat, what's your reason? If you're really clear on it, there might be some other ones out there as well. But I'd like you to start by describing your ideal garden. What does it actually look like? You know, picture it's already there. What does it look like? How does it feel to live in it? Um, Tell me about an ideal day in your garden. What do? You pop outside, you put your boots on. What are you doing? Are you actively pottering around? Are you going and finding a quiet tree, sitting under it and reading? What's an ideal day for you, and how would you like to actually experience it once it's complete? And if you go deeply into that, and also if you do that, I should say, with everyone in your household, because if you've got four people in your household, you'll probably have four different opinions on what that is. So we need to try and work them together. But that is the kind of essence of what we need to really hone in on to start with. Gosh, I forgot how many people were in here tonight. So we've got lots of answers coming in. Insect diversity and entertainment from Ian. Felicia's into attracting native birds and easy to maintain. A funny, Felicia, no one has ever asked me for a high maintenance garden before. So yes, easy to maintain, that's the key, isn't it? People want it to be productive, attractive, biodiversity and pollinators, some veggies people want as well, growing as much food as possible, uh, relaxing to eat breakfast and have friends over from Jeanette, as well as veggies and birds. Yes. Oh, Samwise is asking for a high maintenance garden. Oh, haha, great. Okay, so yes, everyone's got their own reason. So just work out what yours is, and then we can really hone in on that specifically. So from here, what we can do is actually like try and detect our own unique goals and write a vision statement. I know some people groan at the sounds of that, but taking the time to actually write this and check if it feels right will then be a rudder through which you can assess decisions that pop up down the track. So, what we want to try and do here is focus not on specific things that we might want, like, I want a deck chair under a pear tree, or I want a raised garden bed and a lemon, or something like that. No, focus on the functions of the garden and the feel, what we might call, I guess, in Australia, the vibe, rather than the details of the form that you want. And so this gives us a general overview of the sort of garden that we're after. What we try and do is use the present and active tense to make it feel like the garden already exists. So if you need to get started in that tense, you would start with my garden is a place where, and then it will flow in that present active tense. Not my garden will be. Uh, and what that can do is just allow it to, yeah, feel like it already exists and check that it feels right. Dave Jackie, who's been an incredible mentor for many of us in this garden design permaculture space, just reminds everyone that you get it down, then you get it good. So this will never come out fully formed in one go. Just start typing and then edit. And that will help you put up something that feels right after a bit of revision. And he would say it's done when it lifts your spirit and gives you energy. So, for our Mulberry House example, after doing the client interview with my friends Jess and Louise, the most significant info that came out of that was their need for it to be a really calm and peaceful space. Very busy family world. Everything feels a little bit hectic, rushed. What they want from the garden is somewhere that can just break that and feel calm and peaceful. In particular for them, having lots of herbs and scented flowers were quite important for, yeah, some sort of family symbolic reasons and some other things as well. Really wanted produce to preserve and to share with others. They like to socialize, so they want gatherings of less than 20 people, including kids, as a bit of a gauge. Having some kind of fire pit or central barbecue or something to all gather around, and garden rooms for our kids to play. And they're really, really excited to have a mulberry cubby house for the kids under the weeping mulberry. So, taking the things that felt like they really exemplified the vibe, we put together this vision statement. Mulberry House is our peaceful family home where we relax with the scents of our favourite flowers and herbs. Our food garden is small and manageable but very productive, and we take pride in our homegrown gifts. On the weekends, we gather and laugh around the fire while Maddie and Zach share secret garden paths with their friends and go on grand adventures in the magical Mulberry Cubby House. So be a little bit playful in there if you want to be. But yeah, the aim here is just to kind of encapsulate the essence of what this garden is going to be about. So that if it does that, then you know you've succeeded. And what I do here is just go, does that feel right? Is that everything that you're after? If we did this, would it be the perfect garden? And we'll keep adjusting it until we get it right. So, along with the vision statement, obviously some other very important information. You're going to want to think about your time, skills, and experience for gardening being as realistic as possible. People tell you how much time they've got for their garden, and then I would sort of quarter it and try and design something for that, because life happens, obviously. You may have some long-term plans that you know about in terms of like how long you plan to be in the house, major life changes that might pop up. You may even plan to live in this home forever, in which case we should make sure that it suits someone, like yourself in 20 or 30 years' time. Your budget and other resources. Keeping in mind that with gardens, you could virtually design and implement a garden for almost no money as long as you're prepared to put in quite a lot of time and effort. You know, you can scavenge materials, you can pick up things from hard rubbish. Sometimes you can propagate all your own plants. We can do all kinds of things, but you've got to have the time to back that up. So just think about whether you're someone who likes to pay professionals and get it done quickly, or someone who's prepared to put in that effort over the long haul. You might like to think about your tastes. Do you like things to be quite formal and neat, or do you like them to be quite wild and more natural, or combinations of those, and maybe one in the front and one in the back can also be fine. Think about what will stay or go. So many people are also planning something big like a renovation, or changes into the building footprint. Really want to have that ideally done before we start working on the garden, because builders are not very good at tiptoeing around garden beds, let me say. So what's staying and going? Are there any trees or things that you definitely know that you want to keep, or ones that may need to go? Keeping in mind, of course, we never want to take out trees unless there's a good reason. But just be really clear from the beginning on that. Any other limiting factors that you can think of? And so for me, these are things that affect the entire design. So they could be something like, we've got a dog, and it's the kind of dog that, the whole design needs to respond to. We know that there's soil contamination, more on that later. Or we're just particularly time poor, so we really need to have something that requires absolute minimum maintenance. Think about those. And then finally, in this kind of prep point here, we want to come up with a wish list. So we'll be able to derive some of that from the other thoughts that we've had. And the wish list is going to include things that we'll need to position on the map, which is really what we'll be talking about tonight. So here's some common ones, things like your veggie patch, fruit trees, herbs, water tank, grey water, chickens, habitat garden, pond, social area, kids play. There's lots more that will be specific for you. But one thing people also do in this step is they forget something they need that's really practical. Like, we need to have a clothesline in there. We need a compost system somewhere. We've got a lot of bikes that we need to store, whatever it is. So make sure that it works for your real life, not just your fantasy life where you garden all the time. Okay, so the Mulberry House wish list looks like this. We're going to come back to it later, but these are some things that were mentioned during the interview. The barbecue and fire pit, which was a central sort of heart for the social area. Places for the kids to play. Pumpkins, citrus, especially a lime tree. It's not in any particular order, it was just the conversation and the way things came up. So there's a bunch of fruits in there, flowers, even veggies, which are kind of irrelevant for us at this level of design. But we know they want a veggie bed. Trampoline, washing line, berries, compost chickens, herbs, and undercover bike storage for a large electric bike. So that's our starting point. We're going to leave that, and then we'll come back to it later, and I'll show you how I organize that so that it doesn't hurt my brain, and put it into a structure that I can use for design. The next thing is we need to try and find some kind of a base map for our design. And a base map is where we record our site analysis observations, and also a canvas that we can draw our design onto. So pretty helpful. Ideally, our base maps are in what we call plan view, which is like a completely overhead view, and also a friendly scale. And a friendly scale is one where we can kind of do the maths in our head, and we don't need to, pull out a calculator, and we can kind of, gauge things quite easily once we get used to a scale. And so professionally, there are ways that we can do that. Some of them are quite expensive, require quite expensive mapping software. Here's a kind of not too hard to put together base map that I might use, for example, in design. The problem is that this base map has used something called Nearmap, which is behind a very expensive paywall. So for people who are just wanting to do their own house, you don't need to go in for something like that. What I thought I would show you tonight is just another option, which gives you, it's a good enough result really for a home garden design, but it doesn't require a, thousands of dollars prescription to do it. So there is a government mapping software tool that you can use called MapShare. And actually thought I will jump into it, see if I can do this. I trust you'll tell me if it's not working for you. Um, I'm in MapShare now. Someone give me a thumbs up in the chat if it's worked. And this is like a free, thank you, Kath. This is a free government mapping tool that you can use anywhere in the state. And I didn't want to do someone's home address, so I've just pulled up the address for the Holden Street neighbourhood house in Fitzroy North. And I'm going to search for that so that you can see the steps here. So I've searched for the address, as you can see in the bar at the top. And then the key steps are we want to get the aerial photography up. So I'm clicking on VicMap Cartographical and then VicMap Aerial Imagery. And I should have said I've got these steps written down, and I do have some notes for you tonight that will have them in as well. So I've got the aerial imagery up, and I actually got it first time round, but if you are zoomed in or out, you lose that aerial map. So I'll just demonstrate that here by clicking out. You can click out a fair way, but often we're trying to zoom in. So just know that if you go too far, you lose it, and you just need to zoom out again. We've also got a blue box, which is a bit irritating. So I just clear it by just doing that cross in the left-hand panel. And then what I want to do is get it really close to this scale bar, because the scale bar is helpful to us. This image is in a scale, it's just not in the kind of scale that is friendly. And unfortunately, I have tried typing in a scale into MapShare. It doesn't allow you to put it into a useful scale unless it's 1 to 400. It's extremely random. I can't answer why that would be. But anyway, it is small, but we could take a screenshot of this aerial image and blow it up, and that will actually give us almost an instant base map. So that is, in my books, pretty handy. I'm going to go back into my slides now. What you can see on the right-hand side there is a screenshot that I've taken of the Mulberry House site, just to show you the resolution. I know it's not great, but it's so much greater than getting out there with a measuring tape and spending like probably a whole day trying to accurately measure and then plot your site. What I've done for the bottom image is just put it into grayscale, and then I've increased the transparency a bit, which will mean you can read your writing over the top of it when you're doing your site analysis. And if you wanted to, I'm not much of a hand drawer myself, but you can actually print that image out, tape it up to glass, put paper on the top, and then actually trace a line drawing through it. So I just have done that for you so you can see that you can create that. So not bad. And that was like less than 10 minutes of work to get something that is in a scale for my site. Or as Ian has said, beg a mate who works for council or land development for near map images. Yes, absolutely, Ian. And also, if you've got a university library membership, I think you can also access Nearmap through that as well, which will give you really up-to-date images, several across the year that you can go to as well. So it is a really amazing tool. But yeah, that's the way to do it for free, to get a base map, and this will set you up with something that's in proportion that you can use in your design. Very helpful. All right, so actually, Lee, let's just pause there. I don't think I've seen any questions in chat, but I'll just double check with you.
No, nothing that's come up that needs immediate. No, I think you can carry on.
Okay.
At this stage. Yeah.
That was pretty straightforward. This is the tricky stuff we're going to get into now. But yeah, do feel free to pop those questions in the chat, folks. So now we're moving into site analysis. And my role as a teacher when I'm teaching design is to try and get people to spend most of their time here and not jump ahead into doing design. And actually, I'm just going to jump back. I've seen has put a question in there. Could we use Google Maps instead? You can use Google Maps, but the problem with it, unfortunately, is that it is not a direct overhead photograph usually. So it's taken from a bit of an angle, and that means the whole proportion of the block is often skewed out. So you can get some very funny measurements and things like that if you tried to deduce anything to scale from your Google Maps image. So if that's all you've got, great, go for it. It's probably good enough for a rough garden design. But actually, I think the Vic Plan images are a real step up from Google Maps simply because they're in proportion. Okay, so back to site analysis, spend most of your time here. It's very common for me to spend 3/4 of my time working on a job in analysis, and then the actual concept design often pops out because what site analysis does is it limits our options. It makes it very clear everything that's going on and things that are not possible. And so gradually the number of options that we have really whittles down. So we make better decisions, and the design tends to be much more obvious once we've done this properly. So, site analysis. Um, probably the most obvious thing that we need to do is assess the sun. This is admittedly a little bit tricky to teach online, but I'll do my very best. And basically, what we're just after is, which areas get full sun all year, none of the year, what gets part sun, maybe in winter, full sun in summer, those kind of things. But to do this well, we really have to understand like how does the sun actually move, which is a bit of a mystery to a lot of people until you've studied something related. So I have this fabulous diagram that was put together by Nick Lom, who I've never met, and I applaud Nick and thank them for their work. But this is actually showing you the way that the sun moves around in Naarm, Melbourne. When I say moves around, of course, the sun is like the center and we're moving around it, but the apparent pathway of the sun appears to move from our perspective. So we have these times of year where it's doing particular things. And for most of us, the sun comes up in the east and goes down in the west. But it turns out that that is actually true only twice a year. And that's on the equinoxes, one in spring and one in autumn, which we've actually just passed the autumn equinox around the 21st of March every year. So for the rest of the year, it's actually moving up to this summer solstice arc or then moving down to the winter solstice arc. And you can see that, for example, in the winter solstice, it's actually coming up in front of east. It's coming up northeast and then going down northwest. And in the summer, it's coming up southeast and it's going down southwest. So it's actually swinging around east and west where it comes up and goes down. So quite interesting, and I'll try and show you some of the implications of that in these images. The image on the left is looking at the height of the arc, and in winter the sun actually does a very low arc, so the top of it is about 30 degrees. The equinox is where we've just passed, it's around 50. And the summer solstice, it's not overhead, which is a really common misconception. If you're in the tropics, it's overhead, but for us here, it gets up to about 75 degrees as an arc. On the right-hand side, it's those arcs again. This time they're still. So you can see the angles, if you have a look at the angles of those sun sort of dots there, you can see the summer arc and the winter arc. And you can see the shadows that they're creating, obviously very short in summer and very long in winter. So this is the kind of pattern it's helpful to have in mind when we're thinking about where the sun is going to be throughout the day. And if it's your place, perhaps you've been there for a year and you'll actually kind of know where the sun is going to be. But if you've just moved in somewhere, this is how we predict the sun. And as my colleague Adam says, we see through time. So we can predict these things without having to be there all the time. Um, Again, these are specific for Melbourne. There is one more way to explain this, which is using a solar chart. You can generate these for anywhere in the world. This one is showing you that that's your house roof there, and it's showing you those arcs as if we're soaring a long way above the earth. So you can see the winter solstice where it's coming up on the horizon, and then where it is in relation to the horizon, and then it's going down, and so on. So yeah, you can see that the sun is coming up again in the southeast and going down in the southwest at the summer solstice on December 21st. Yeah, so if we were in person, I'd have you out drawing sun arcs with your hands and, figuring out where the sun is and things like that. But I suppose for online, just getting a sense of, well, the sun actually comes up behind east in the summer and it comes up in front of east in the winter. And then it does like a really high arc in summer and then it does a really low arc in winter. And just sort of trying to trace that with your arms will give you a sense for whether it's going to be blocked by a neighbour's building or by a big tree or a hill, or whether you're going to actually see that arc on your site and receive that full sun. So then from here, what we try and do on site is draw a few bubbles. And yeah, you can observe this throughout the year if it's your place, but just try and figure out where do you get full shade? Where do you get full sun? Where have you got afternoon sun all year? Maybe you have some areas with part winter sun and full summer sun. So just try and get a bit of a map of these bubbles because when we come to actually place things, these are absolutely gold. And a lot of the mistakes that I've made, over the years with my place have been because I didn't have these shade bubbles really locked down. So they are really worth investing time in trying to figure out. Another aspect of site analysis that I'd look at as well is the wind. This is really underappreciated, but winds have a big impact on how comfortable we feel, how hot or cold our homes are, how much water our veggie patches use, or whether our plants thrive or just kind of struggle along. So with this diagram, we've got the hot winds shown coming in from the north and the northwest. They come from that direction because we've got the desert there. So these winds have to pick up their temperature from somewhere. So when we're looking at the hottest winds, they're usually from the north and the northwest. And the coldest winds come from the south and the southwest. We don't tend to get a lot of winds from the east actually in our city. But yeah, these are the ones that I sort of focus on in design because they're the ones that really you feel and your plants feel the most. Keep in mind though that the shape of the land when you are, the topography and buildings and vegetation and even large hot or cold areas nearby, they do change winds. So while this is the broad pattern that I look for, you also have to observe the local area. And you might have a wind that comes from another direction where you are because of the nearby hills and so forth. It's worth understanding a little bit about wind when we're doing design as well. Uh, Winds, if we moderate them, if we're able to soften them, they can increase the yields in our garden, they can shelter animals, they can reduce the need to mechanically heat or cool your home, so cut your bills down. They also look really nice as well, windbreaks. Um, so if we want to do an effective windbreak, probably the most important thing to understand is that a solid barrier, like a wall, creates more wind, not less, typically, because the wind tends to eddy and tumble as it passes over it. So wind breaks, things that let some wind through turn out to be, vegetation turns out to be the most effective type. And so we have the diagram above just showing you the height of your vegetation, of your windbreak. Um, if we times that by 3 to 10 roughly, we could get a 30 to 50% reduction in wind speed on the leeward side of it. So it's obviously depends so much on context, but that gives you a rough idea. You know, if you've got a 1 meter hedge, you have 3 to 10 meters worth of softened wind on the leeward side of it, for example. So that's a little bit around how wind behaves and how we can soften it. Um, I can see Tanya says, how do nearby properties affect winds, like housing developments, 2 to 3 story versus 4 to 5 or 8? Well, look, you know, at the ground level, they're probably pretty similar, but when we've got lots of hard buildings, of course, they funnel wind and we tend to get wind tunnels. Um, and how does that impact heat retention? Well, it's more about just, you know, those drying winds in summer. And think about how quickly your laundry might dry on the line, for example, on a hot, windy day, almost instantly. And the same effect will happen to veggies as well. So if we can shelter our properties or homes from wind, then we have, for example, reduced water demand in the summer.
There's a couple of questions from the sun part. Did you want to go back to that? Or
Maybe we'll just come to that at the end when we've done this site analysis section. That's all right.
yep, yep.
Yep. Cool. Um, so yeah, just to hone in on windbreaks, things that soften wind. So you can look out for these in site analysis, or you can design them later on. The picket style fence that you can see above that lets a little bit of wind through. That's a nice softening fence. A solid wall is not, as we know. The vegetation that you see below, if you looked out in one of those wind directions, where you likely would get a strong hot or cold wind from, if you saw something like this, you'd feel very sheltered, like you've got it covered. Um, and so that they're the sorts of things that function really well as windbreaks for us. So look out for whether or not you've got those during the site analysis phase. There are some other microclimates that I'd like to look out for while we're doing site analysis. And this word microclimate, it means an area that has localized conditions that are different to the surrounding area. So for example, with a hill, just having a hill creates so many different microclimates. We have obviously dry spots on the top, and we tend to have more moisture accumulating around the bottom. We have a sunny side and a more shaded side. We have things like erosion, so we tend to have thinner soils at the top of the hill and thicker soils at the bottom. All kinds of different microclimates that a hill can create. And they're often created by, yeah, sun and wind and other sorts of external things. So what we can do during site analysis is identify them so that we can respond to them in some way during our design. But when we're doing design, we might deliberately create the microclimates to suit something that we're trying to do. So there's actually like a whole range of microclimates that I could talk about here, but there's two that tend to be most significant that I thought I'd pop in tonight's session. The first one is reflection. Uh, and here we are, Bertie the cat, the master microclimate analyst, who has found a very warm, sunny spot in winter to have a nap. And obviously, all that reflected light is like a solar oven, basically. It's concentrating on Bertie, and yes, really bringing the warmth. So if you do want to assess microclimates, often asking pets is a good way to do it. But this has got some real implications for us in design. So, for example, here, um, this, this was taken during a time uh, when we were visiting with masks and things in recent years. My friend Diane here is pointing at a rather spectacular cabbage. I know it's very small. And that cabbage is actually growing against a south-facing fence, which is to the far right of your screen. And I'm particularly impressed because I know that cabbages don't tend to grow well where there's a lot of shade, but it's been made possible because she's got this light coloured wall, which is north facing, that has been bouncing the light onto that cabbage relentlessly. So, so plants really know. Plants can tell when there's enough light and they respond. This garden in the centre top has got a mirror, quite a large mirror. And so for people who are in tight, kind of pokey, sometimes dark, small courtyards, or even balconies, and there's quite a lot of these now these days, if you can have a white wall or a mirror or something like that, you can really radically change the conditions in your small growing area and grow things you wouldn't otherwise be able to. There's some white walls, and you can see an orchard here where they've laid down some white matting for a bit more light to reflect and ripen that fruit. And a friend's house here, top left, where they've bucked the trend of dark roofs and they've got a light roof now, which is really helping them get through heat waves without needing air conditioning so much. Um, so anyway, reflection, very helpful microclimate, but also in the wrong spot can be terrible. So, so assess for reflection as one of the microclimates. Another one we want to look at is the heat bank. So a heat bank is made up of materials with thermal mass. And materials with thermal mass are able to absorb, store, and then release heat at night, usually. And things with thermal mass tend to be heavy as a bit of an indicator. So these are the things where if the sun was shining on them during the day, as the sun drops away, you'd put your hand on them and it would feel warm. And it can be shocking, actually, not just warm, but hot, really, really hot. And imagine that as a battery that then is just powering out that heat during the night. And this is the stuff that keeps our cities cooking through a hot patch in summer. It makes it really, really uncomfortable and hard for us to sleep at night. And of course, dark coloured thermal mass soaks up heat a lot more effectively. So we do want to watch out for these, and sometimes we need to try and mitigate them. And sometimes we can use them to grow things which might be not as comfortable in our climate. And Sunil has said, won't heat bank become a cold bank in winter? And that's actually true. Yeah, so they can actually store cold. So the trick is trying to get the right amount of sun on them at the right time of year, which we might not be able to get to fully in tonight's session. But yeah, deciduous shelter over the top from a plant that drops its leaves in the winter can give you the best of both worlds. And if we shade thermal mass in summer, then it actually becomes a cool bank and can help kind of moderate that extreme heat that we're often feeling these days. Here's an application of heat banks. This is a friend's garden in Seaholme. So it's near the beach, which does help as well. But this is a north-facing brick wall, and as you can see, a really spectacular banana crop. And yes, this is Melbourne now, growing bananas, and it is made possible through the right choice of banana, but also the right microclimate, helped along by this heat bank wall, which is keeping them cozy all night long. Okay, so site analysis. There's we've just covered a couple of things looking at sun and shade patterns, hot and cold winds, um, some of the useful or could be problematic microclimates, but there are a bunch of other things as well to look out for. And this isn't at all an exhaustive list, but the main ones I'd like you to look for are views. Uh, People care a lot about views, and views are nice. Some of them are unwanted as well, so make sure you look out for things that you don't want, like maybe neighbours that overlook your main living area potentially, or something that's not pleasant or comfortable. Check out your direction of slope, and if you've got any particularly flattish or steep areas, they might be worth noting. Of course, all your tap, downpipe drain, and tank locations. Where you've got access to grey water, so this is water from your shower, your bath, or your clothes washing machine, which, when it's used safely, can be repurposed for watering your garden. Your any access paths, any storage that you need, workspaces, any utilities that you can see, like underground or overhead pipes or wires. We've got more on those coming up. Um, Existing major plants, anywhere you might have lots of root competition from, say, large established trees, and also any major weeds, which definitely include any tough rhizomatous grasses that you've got, things like couch, kikuyu, or buffalo grass. It's like the typical kind of lawn grasses that we have. They can be quite competitive with food gardens, and we need to deal with them. Note down any animals, maybe your own animals or wildlife pests, soil, potential sources of contamination, more on that soon. And then what does it or doesn't feel good, and what is or isn't working in the garden. And then anything else that could be relevant that you notice. Okay, so it's a big list there that'll be in the notes for this session. But those are the sorts of things that we'd be walking around and putting on our base map. And I might have several base maps, by the way, and just do layers, one on, water, for example, one on sun, one on utilities and storage and access and things like that. So you don't get too cluttered on your base map. Otherwise your thinking gets cluttered as well. There's also quite a lot that we can learn from desktop research. And really, you can fall down some proper rabbit holes here, but there's some key ones that I'd like everyone to do when we're designing a garden. One of the, arguably most important is really check your bushfire risk. And the CFA has got a page, Am I at risk? And, go there and have a look yourself, but it will highlight for you, not just if you live in the forest, so that's obvious, but if you live adjacent to paddocks, on the edge of a rural area, if you're in a coastal area, coastal scrub is highly flammable. There's a few contexts that maybe people are not always fully aware of their bushfire risk. So I really would like you to check that out. And of course, if you are in an area that's prone to bushfire, then there are specific guidelines as well that should be an overlay over your design. So check out the CFA's Landscaping for Bushfire advice, and it will talk, for example, about the amount of clearance you need around your house, and the way that you design to prevent the run of fire through landscaping and so forth. I'll go as far as saying compulsory check, very important, is check out the free utilities maps that you can get from, it used to be called Dial Before You Dig, now it's called Before You Dig Australia. This is a free search, anyone can do it, and it will spit out some quite alarming advice notices, heads up, but it will also just give you all the maps that the utilities companies have for your place. So here are some from recent jobs that I've done. It does sometimes feel like you needed some kind of specialist degree to read them, but yeah, look at them long enough, and you'll be able to work out where the gas pipelines and sewers and stormwater and telephone lines are, etc. Sometimes it'll just say underground cable, location unknown. So we don't always know that, particularly older properties are a bit harder. But you'll just need to go gently and use hand tools if you're not sure. But that's a very important precautionary check because you are responsible for any damage that you cause there. Sorry, I know I can see a couple of your questions, but I'm going to keep moving, and we'll come back to them at the end if we don't have time at the end of the session, the end of the section. Another really important check to do is for soil contamination, and predominantly the one that comes up again and again, that's a problem in home gardens, is lead, as in heavy metal. And we are very fortunate that there's a free soil testing program that's run through the Environment Protection Authority in Victoria called Garden Safe. So the address is on screen, and this will test for a number of heavy metals in your soil. It's not a complete test, as in it doesn't test for chemical contaminants, but it does test for the ones that the EPA is the most worried about home gardeners being exposed to. So I really strongly encourage you to have a look at that. And then I did pop in here just a little bit on lead soil contamination because it can be alarming if you do get results back that does say a fair amount of lead. So I thought we'd just chat briefly about what that actually means for us. It's a very common contaminant from house paint, from leaded petrol, also lots of industries used it as well. It's not good. There's no safe level of lead exposure, but kids in particular are at quite significant risk. So particularly if you're gardening with young people, please do just check the level of lead in your soil. Um, you can't get rid of lead unless you remove the soil that it's in, but it's also not very mobile, so it doesn't tend to move around unless it's physically moved or blown by wind, for example. Uh, Most of the contamination seems to be concentrated near the drip line of houses and near main roads as well. So where deposition from leaded petrol presumably has settled and where leaded paint has kind of eroded walls over time and then run down into soil. Um, so adding organic matter, otherwise known as things like compost and mulch and aged manures, and also keeping the pH of the soil at a neutral level. So that's the acid or alkaline balance. And also having good calcium levels in your soil, lower the amount that plants can absorb. So these things are generally good anyway for good production in a sort of food garden. But yeah, especially important because they can also lower your risk here. It turns out that fruits, and that includes fruiting vegetables like tomato, beans, pumpkin, cucumbers, they tend to have very low levels of lead in the fruit itself, whereas leafy greens and root veggies are a bit higher risk and they tend to take up more. So if you do come back with some lead in your soil, one of the strategies might be to move towards more fruits. But also note that, yeah, washing and peeling your veggies where possible is a great way to minimize the amount of soil that you indirectly kind of eat and also minimize dust. And even leaving your shoes outside, the latest research is showing that a lot of this exposure comes through walking soil into our homes and then breathing it in. So just being really aware of it and leaving shoes outside, that's a great strategy. Poultry can be an issue if we're designing gardens with chickens, so we need to think carefully and make sure that they don't access the original soil. So you might lay down some geotextile fabric or shade cloth and then have your poultry on top of that in some mulch. And yes, there definitely are circumstances where you get a very high read come back. And in that case, you do need a more serious strategy. You might need to remove that soil, cap what's there, or use raised vegetable beds. So this is to say, like, we can absolutely be gardening and we can be growing food in areas that have some lead contamination, but it's good to be very clear around what's there and also have a deliberate strategy in place to manage that risk. And as Jeanette says, if you plant in above ground beds filled with new soil, you should be okay. Yeah, you should be, Jeanette, but of course we need to make sure that that soil has come from a reliable source. I will say, like, I do know people who have actually still been unlucky. Unfortunately, even buying soil in, so it doesn't hurt to check even if you've actually bought soil in, do a test. But yeah, generally you'll be fine. And it is totally illegal to sell soil that's contaminated. So that would be a very rare occasion. Um, how do we know it's from a reliable source? Says Sunil, get it from a landscaper that specializes in food gardens. Um, so yeah, for example, Boleyn Art and Garden, they're reputable. One that's yeah, commonly used by food landscapers is a good reliable source, but there's nothing that can absolutely 100% guarantee it every time. Okay, one other check that I'd really encourage people to do is to learn about your traditional owners where you live, and also actually check if you're in an area that has cultural heritage sensitivity. There's an Aboriginal cultural heritage sensitivity mapping tool that you can use. And the image to the bottom left of your screen here is pulled up from that. Basically, anywhere close to a waterway, we know has quite a likelihood of being an area with cultural sensitivity. But there are some other spots as well, some green dots that you can see here for various artifacts and other significant meeting places and so forth. So it's nice to know these things, and it also means you're in a better position to protect any heritage that you might accidentally come across while you're doing your gardening. So it's just something to be aware of and a way that we can all contribute to protecting Aboriginal cultural heritage. And finally, do find out about your local bioregion and Indigenous plants and animals. Your local council is often a really great source of information here, and will often have planting guides and recommended places to visit nearby where you can learn about these things. And that will mean that you're well placed to do a garden design that actually contributes to the conservation efforts that are happening near you. And you can learn, for example, about particular species that are critically endangered in your local area and perhaps find ways to support and grow them in your garden. Okay, so back to my example mulberry house, and just showing you that overhead photo again. And here is the summary that I put together of the most significant site analysis information. So I'll go through this briefly and then I'll cross back to you, Lee, and just we can see. I know there's been a lot of questions. I actually don't think that we'll be able to get through all of them, but any kind of general ones that we can tackle before we move on. So I just want to show you here. You can see I've got a bit of a sun map. There's this precious pocket of full sun all year, of which there is not very much. And we've also got a summer full sun with afternoon shelter and winter part sun, but with quite a lot of open sky, which I didn't say. And if you're in a small backyard or even a balcony and you can see a lot of sky, then you actually do tend to get kind of reflected light of clouds coming in, which can be helpful for growing. So that's a special little microclimate. We've got summer shade and winter part sun in this corner here, and so forth. So I've really mapped out the sun all the way through the block. I've got a high exposure to cold southerly winds in winter coming in over that fence. And in the front garden, there's high exposure to hot north, west, and west winds in summer and cold winds in winter as well. And I've noted that this is a very hot and exposed wall with the light reflecting and concrete heat bank in summer. So there's just a couple of the key observations for this particular block. Now I'll just go back to Lee. Is there anything general that we could answer about site analysis before moving on?
So I guess there's a question about is sun analysis is that similar to or related to shadow studies? Would be
Oh,
one question.
I mean, I'm assuming I know what shadow studies are. I guess they're kind of two sides of the same coin, but it might be
Yeah.
something specific that I
Mm,
don't know about there. Yes.
mm. And somebody wants to, and maybe we can send this later, any more detailed information around understanding sun patterns because they
Yeah.
didn't quite pick it up, but there
Yes,
will be notes.
there will be.
Uh,
I think
yeah.
I'll also send you the GIF so that you can see the movement of the sun. And then I guess
Hmm.
actually maybe just if you can take a laptop or something outside and actually have a look at that as you're looking at your own block, maybe that's a way to translate the online into the real world. Otherwise, I'd say come along to some of the other workshops in this program where we sort of teach this in a face-to-face context and we can go through it in more detail with you.
Yeah. And then there are a few more specific questions about those really tough to remove weeds and things, but I guess that would be getting into the detail of the design, like oxalis and other of those lawns. Yep.
Yeah.
Without using chemicals. Yep.
Uh, Happy to answer that, but maybe we'll do it at the end. Um,
Yep.
so I thought what we do now is we'll just have a quick 5 minute break because this is on the long end for an online session. So if we maybe come back at, I think maybe let's say 7:45, it's just an opportunity to go and grab a cuppa. And when we come back, what we'll do is start looking at the details of that wish list, connections that we can make, and then get into that concept design finally.
And those that just entered, I just allowed 3 people in. Sorry, we're just having a very quick break. So just get yourself comfortable and we'll be back in, 5 minutes? Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'll see you then, folks. Hey, welcome back, everyone. I trust that you've settled back in with your evening cuppers, and I'm going to keep going through. We've now made it to the stage of concept design, having hopefully spent most of our time and energy on the site analysis. As I said, that is by far the most important part, being very clear on your vision, what you're hoping to achieve from the garden, and then really getting to know in as much detail as possible the space that we're working with. And that could, as I said, be a balcony. You might be assessing, which bits do you have the most sun in? Are there strong winds on there? Are there any other kind of things that you need to be aware of, like building regulations or weight limits, things like that for the smaller scale apartments? Um, but yeah, also with the larger garden, I've given you now quite a long list of things to go and look for. So now we're up to the stage of the concept design. We're going to revisit firstly our wish list. And remember, this is the list of things that we're going to be placing on a map. Um, so what we want to try and do is, where we can, actually reduce the complexity by grouping things together that are going to, realistically, they're going to be placed together on the map. And what we also want to do is try and order the wish list from the things which are really hard to change at the top to the things that are really easy to change at the bottom. And what this means is that we kind of work with things that are more fixed early, and then those things which tend to influence other things, then work our way down. And so it's really about not having to backtrack and doing things in a bit of a flow that makes sense. So, for example, we often start by, one book I have says you start by planting the water first. So you figure out where you can get water to, and then you design to that. And then if you can't get water to one part of your garden, then you put a shed there, or you design species that don't require irrigation in that corner, for example. So figuring out where the water is on your site and where it can get to is often a very foundational step. So we might first design our water in terms of maybe where we have taps or position taps, where a tank is going, and also significantly in our climate where we have access to grey water, once again being water from the shower, bath, or clothes washing machine. And there are rules around using grey water. So please go and look up safety in grey water. But finding out where you can actually get grey water to flow on your property is a really important part of this design process. Then after we know where the water is, it often makes sense to position structures. So if you know that you need to put in a clothesline or a shed or a pergola or something like that, figure out where those are going to be. There's also this issue of access, so you probably need paths to and from the shed, for example, or the clothesline. And so now might be a time to faintly mark in where a major path might be. And then around those things, it can define the microclimates and the sun conditions where veggies, fruit trees, or other garden elements might be. And finally, animals we might start to play with in the design. So this isn't in any sense of fixed order, but it's a starting point, and you will find yourself jumping between these quite a bit. But this is the sort of order that I usually consider a wish list in. And I would also now start thinking about what each element needs and produces. So, for example, your chickens will need a source of water, food, some shelter, etc., and they produce manure, they produce scratching and looking for pests and eating fallen fruit and so on. Think about how much attention each thing requires. And we have a zoning concept in permaculture where we say you put the thing that needs you or that you need the most closest to where you are spending time. So it's the oftenest nearest rule or the mostest closest rule we talk about. Terrible English. And we also think about whether anything can serve multiple functions. So we'll have some examples of that coming up in just a minute. So back to our mulberry house example, and this is the wish list that fell out of the client interview in no particular order. If I were to start trying to design with this, my brain might explode and I'd probably do a bit of a messy job. So what I ended up doing was simplifying it and ordering it to um, facilitate the concept design. So the major water element here to place was the tank, and then I had some structures, the trampoline, which felt very constrained, so I popped that quite early, and then the bike storage shed and the washing line, and then I decided the social area would also go in at that point. And then annual veggies, fruit trees, berries, chickens, and lastly, the composting system, because a compost bin or a worm farm can really get tucked in and it really shouldn't determine other elements. So that was my intended order, and I will show you at the end of the session how I ended up flowing through that in design. Okay, so there's almost infinite numbers of things we could talk about in tonight's session, but I decided what might be most helpful is if we look at some of the more common elements that people want to have in gardens, and particularly sustainable gardens. And then I give you a sense for the sorts of things that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to position them in the design. And I've done this in that sort of flow that I've just said. So starting by looking at water tanks. Um, so even the question, should I have a water tank, is worth asking. And one of the best tools that we have to answer that question is a website called the Tankulator, and it's by the organization Renew. And this is a modeling website that you can access for free that will give you advice on tank selection and sizing. And so you'll actually plug in where you live and things like how much roof area or catchment you have, and which connections you intend to make, as in, will it also flush toilets or wash laundry as well as water the garden? And then the tankulator will incredibly model what a tank of different capacities will do. Will it be overflowing all year? Will it be dry all year? And will it be helpful in the driest possible year on record, for example? So I strongly recommend everybody considering a tank go and plug in their numbers to the Tankulator website. And that will answer all those kind of tricky questions around what size tank makes sense and, will it be catching a useful amount of water? Some other tips for tanks are, yeah, make sure you have sufficient roof catchment. Just because you put in a tank doesn't mean you have water. It's an obvious point, but a bigger tank doesn't mean that you catch more water. You need to make sure that there's enough roof area and it's draining to the tank. And keep in mind that many roofs have got multiple downpipes, and you can only catch that water if you can get the downpipe going into the tank. So some houses you may want multiple tanks, which gets painful and potentially expensive. You may, for example, want to divert a downpipe directly into a garden bed rather than trying to catch it in a tank first. And that may make more sense in your conditions. Keep in mind as well that often the goal for a water tank is to save water. And if we're trying to save mains water, the water we'd otherwise buy, you might save more by having the tank plumbed into your laundry and toilets rather than even into your garden. And the reason being that many people don't water their gardens very much at all in winter, but your use for laundry and toilets goes through the entire year. It may not actually save you even much money because we tend to pay the most for water for utilities, the actual kind of fixed costs rather than the actual usage costs. So all these things are worth thinking about before you invest in the tank. You will almost certainly require a pump, unfortunately, unless you are lucky enough to have a giant platform to put your tank on or a property with a very large hill. It's hard to replicate the pressure that we get from mains water for free. So if you wanted to use drip irrigation or water and not spend hours out there with a very weak flow, usually you'll require a pump for your tank as well. Another tip with placing tanks is you have to make sure that you can actually move the tank into position. There's no magic trick for getting a tank off a truck and into a tight corner in your block. It has to move there. So make sure that the pathway is clear and you can actually squeeze it into where you're hoping. And some backyards that are really blocked off without any access, you'll be quite limited and you'll probably only be able to have a slimline tank. And also make sure that you don't block the access that you need to maintain your home. Anyone who puts a tank up against a house wall needs to kind of, I guess, realize that you won't be maintaining that wall. And that can be a problem, for example, for weatherboard houses, which often require quite regular wall maintenance. Now, in terms of clever design, can we think about, whether the tank can stabilize temperature through using its thermal mass, or perhaps the area behind it is shaded and we can use that for something like keeping chickens cool through the summer, or perhaps keeping a worm farm cool. And tanks also can be quite a nice screen as well, I suppose, depending on your aesthetics. But they're quite a large block that we can use sometimes to screen a view that we might not like. So there's some hints for tanks. Pergolas. So if you come and do one of the Shelter Your Home workshops through My Smart Garden, we can talk you through in fine-grained detail how to keep sun off your home. But a shortcut is that pergolas, especially on the northern wall of the house, are often really helpful to protect your house from summer sun and also let the winter light come through. So here's a lovely example of an ornamental grape doing that job on a home that I visited. And I can also show you in the bottom right hand corner a pergola that I quickly sketched up for a client to protect a house wall from western sun. And in this case, it needed to come down the pergola a bit because the sun drops down in the west in the afternoon. So you can hopefully see that there. So yeah, pergolas, really nice sustainable garden design feature. And generally we cover them with a deciduous vine. And generally in our climate, grapes end up being a really good choice. So you can either do that with a fruiting grape, remembering that you'll have to net them. Otherwise they can get a bit messy when wildlife comes to take them away. Or you can use an ornamental grape like the one you can see here, which is very pretty and can be a better choice if you've got a very high pergola, or if you know that you don't want fruit dropping and you don't want to manage a fruiting crop. Um, just looking in the chat, and yes, Rose has pulled up the MapShare website. Thank you, Rose. So moving on to access, and here's a very, very early garden photo from my place. And I just want to point out, if you don't have access, you've got issues. It's really hard to get to your crops or just move around your garden. And you tend to have also poor airflow, so you don't have the fungal dispelling benefit of airflow and also sunshine getting in there. So designing garden paths is as important as designing the garden itself. And when we have good access, we tend to manage the garden better and also harvest it at the right time. And so we get better yields as well. So think about access as providing not just movement access, but also benefits like airflow and allowing sometimes drainage. And we can also stack functions by sometimes harvesting water off paths if we allow them to run towards a garden bed, for example, and other kinds of jobs as well. So with your path widths, of course, you can do paths at any width you like, but there are some standard widths. For a single person, assuming you're not using a wheelchair or a walking frame, the minimum I would go is 0.5 metre for a minor path. And this might be between garden beds, for example. But I would always do a major path of at least 1.2 metres. And that will allow wheelchairs, walking frames, and wheelbarrows to use that path. Also, if anyone is designing community spaces, having areas for turnaround is important so that, wheelbarrows can pass, and wheelchairs and things. And you need to allow little nodes and things that are wider to allow that purpose. For your veggies, and I did see an earlier question around what does full sun mean? So here's a good spot to deal with that. In the Melbourne climate, uh, I would consider 6 hours of sun in summer to be full sun. Now we may have, 12 or more hours of sun actually coming in that day. So what we're not talking about is the entire day's sun being full sun, but 6 hours is full sun for veggies. That's enough. Beyond that, what we see is veggies that are just stressed, to be honest, and it means our water use goes up and our production goes down. So in the summertime, look for areas for veggies that have about 6 hours of sun. And if there's more than this, try to protect them from excess and especially from afternoon sun, because by that time of day, everything is so hot and exhausted that it can be extra damaging and also unpleasant for you to spend time in. Uh, in winter, however, we actually really want as much sun as possible. Um, as we saw earlier in the session, in the wintertime, the sun does a very small, low arc. And so those winter sun rays are quite precious and they're not as strong. So really, if you had a spot that had full sun in winter, that's often quite a precious spot for veggies. Other things for veggies are trying to put them somewhere you pass regularly and ideally put them very close to your kitchen. Now, you probably need to compromise here because not everyone has a spot that is all of those things. But in an ideal world, yeah, we'd have all of those things for our vegetable garden. Finally, here, try to grow veggies on ground that's relatively flat, because if you don't, water and also nutrients tend to wash down the hill. If you can't do this, then what we do is terrace or step the beds down. And I've got, I think, a photo of that coming up in the next slide, or at least level the surface of your beds so that you don't have water running to one side. Here's a photo of some veggie beds stepping down, just the third from the left, stepping down a hill. You'll need to decide whether or not you're going to grow in-ground or raised beds. So think about whether any of these pros are very important to you. Raised beds are good for drainage, for warming up faster in a cold climate. They're more accessible for people maybe with physical mobility issues. They might deter your kids or pets. If you've got contaminated soil, of course, you may not have a choice. If you've got no topsoil, you might not have a choice. Um, but raised beds do come with quite a lot of costs as well. They're high financial cost, and also the sustainability cost from all those materials and the effort involved can be quite high. They dry out much more quickly unless they're wicking. About every 10 years or so, you often have to rebuild timber beds. And yeah, for renters, they're not easy to move either. So, and it's also hard to change your mind about the design. So think about which one might make sense for you, and remember that people have grown in ground for most of humanity's experience of growing food. So do try and grow in ground unless there's a good reason not to. Quick note on wicking beds. These are very popular with good reason. These sorts of beds are a bit more technical to build or buy, but they have a water reservoir in the base, which basically supplies the soil with the amount required to keep it nice and damp, but hopefully not too wet. There is an excellent free guide on this website shown on screen that goes through the technical side of how to make them. And there's also commercial products that you can buy, self-watering pots and wicking beds. More coming up for renters in just a sec. With your bed shapes and orientation, we want to design ideally so that we can reach all parts of our annual veggie beds from a path. And so what that normally means is if you reach out your arm and you touch someone else who's standing on the opposite path and they've got their arm out. It's about a 1.2 to 1.5 meters bed width. But that can be narrower if you're growing against a wall, for example, as in the photo on the right-hand side. And if you're growing in ground, which is the center image, about a meter or zero point 0.9 meters is often a good width there that people can step over, which is handy. We also talk about the bed orientation. And so when I'm talking about this, it's like the long axis of the bed. So the length of the bed, if it's a rectangle, the long end. And normally we do this north to south. And that is so that particularly in winter, if we're growing a tall crop, it's not blocking the bed directly behind it. So if it's a north-south orientation, the beds on either side of it will get some sun in the morning and the afternoon. But if it's an east-west and you're growing a tall pea crop, then there's a bed behind it that might not get any sun at all in winter, for example. So you can break these rules, but they're good rules of thumb for people to have in mind when you're deciding the layout. Make sure every bed has wheelbarrow access at least one point. Yeah, it can be a bit painful if you haven't done that. Okay, so for pots, you've got an array of options. You can upcycle many, many things. Just make sure that they're not going to contaminate your garden. Make sure they're UV stable, or you protect them from sun so they don't break down. Um, the pot on the left-hand side, I'm not sure if you can actually see it there, but there is one hole drilled um, about a quarter of the way up the side, and that has turned a bucket into a wicking pot that actually holds some water in the base. And that's a fantastic way to grow veggies on a balcony or in a rental, because you can move them around and yeah, really, really space efficient. My advice is make sure that they're at least, 30 centimeters deep, ideally, so that you don't grow bonsai vegetables. And if you do need to move house with them, they also need to be portable. So there's a bit of a suggested length and width there, or about the 60-litre volume is the maximum that two people can safely lift, because these get very, very heavy when you've got wet soil and plants. Most people say get good quality premium potting mix to grow in pots, but my preference has actually been a sandy soil, and that's where I've got the best production from. Realize I'm skipping through a bit here. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock and make sure we get it all in. So for fruit trees, where is there space? And many of us, have got smaller and smaller gardens. So can we train or prune them to a flatter shape, like a kind of hedge or a spalier form? And you can see in the photo here, which is my place, that's what I've done to tuck fruit trees in along the fence behind veggies. So I recommend people group the fruit trees into deciduous and evergreen groups, and also then high demand and low demand species. So high demand would be the ones that tend to need quite a lot of water and nutrient. Classic would be, stone fruit, citrus, apples, for example. And then low demand species, which are more forgiving. And they're things like olives and figs and pomegranates and plums and apricots can fit in there as well. They're a little bit easier than other stone fruit. Deciduous trees, of course, are good for letting in winter sun. Evergreen trees are best positioned on the southern side of your growing area and house, so that they avoid shading other things out. And so here, north is to the left of this photo, and I've got my citrus trees on the southern side of my garden so they don't shade anything behind them. Also put your fruit trees where they can receive grey water if they're a high demand species. Actually, all of these trees along the fence line here are receiving grey water from the clothes washing machine at home, which deposits into the front of that bed. So yeah, I recommend when you're doing your research, look for species that are low demand, reliable, drought and heat tolerant. So again, things like figs, pomegranates, even persimmons as well, grapes. Those sorts of things are likely to give good yields even as our climate continues to get tougher. And I recommend that people net design to net fruit trees easily. So this means often looking up the size of the nets that are available and designing the fruit trees to fit within it. And the largest box nets that you can get that are good quality tend to net about a 3 by 3 meter tree. So that would be the absolute maximum size fruit tree that I would design. Fruit trees provide lots of other benefits. They can be windbreak, shade, privacy. They can combine with chooks as well, quite well. And I also recommend people try and spread out their harvest. So don't have fruit trees that crop all in summer. Try and have things that crop at different times of year as well. And with that in mind, I'm not going to go through it, but I will pop up here some examples of fruit trees that crop at different times of year. And you're welcome to come back and watch the recording and come back to this screen and have a look. And it will give you some idea of how you can spread out that harvest all year round. In the next slide as well, just some tips on choosing your fruit tree varieties as well. So the sorts of things that you can research and have lots of fun selecting before you head out to that nursery. Okay, habitat gardens, coming towards the end of this advice. Habitat gardens are gardens that provide natural sources of food, shelter, and water for Indigenous plants and animals. And together with all the conservation efforts that your local council is doing, they form a really important way of helping wildlife adapt to climate change. And also can give us a lot of joy as well as we get to watch our non-human neighbours. And they, in our climate, tend to be evergreen, so we can design these as year-round screening. And they're quite well suited sometimes to the southern sides of homes as a winter windbreak. So keep that in mind. They're also pretty good if you've got some very sloped areas. If you've got areas that you really don't visit very often, for people looking for extremely low maintenance gardens or to grow things on nature strips, they can be a very good fit. And I suppose the essence of designing a great habitat garden is it's not just a bunch of Indigenous or native plants. What we're after is lots of layers from trees, if we've got space, down to shrubs and grasses and ground covers, so that we've got cover for wildlife to move safely through the garden, but also lots of different niches for species that need different things. So there's a nice example of a layered habitat garden in the left-hand photo there, showing all of those layers. But on the right, if you've just got a few pots on a balcony or if you're in a rental, just a few pots of your local Indigenous species are still a really great contribution and will help, for example, the flow of native insects moving through our suburbs on the way to something bigger as well. So both of those good for different scales of options. Um, there's a lot of advice on habitat gardens. I suppose the essence to talk about here. If you are able to design a reliable water source, this will really increase the value for a lot of species. So we're talking about, yes, a pond, but also just hanging safe water dish or a dish on the ground. But every source of water that you put in needs to have a safe entry or exit point. And this is like a log or a branch leaning into it. Because even little bees can drown, surprisingly. And it also has to be safe for kids. So think about maybe needing to fence it or put some stainless steel mesh on the surface of the pond for their safety as well. Other habitat features you can include things like nesting boxes, hollow logs, as you can see here. Piles of rocks are really good for little skinks and blue-tongue lizards. There's an example of an insect hotel on the right-hand side. This one's got residents in it. If you look closely, you can see many of the holes are occupied. One I wanted to give a shout out for here are dense and prickly shrubs. Prickly shrubs, of course, are not very in fashion in our gardens, but just think about how safe you would feel as a small insect-eating bird if you've got a prickly shrub protecting you from predators. So if you can possibly bring yourself to plant one of those in a corner that you don't need to visit, that's a great contribution. And it will, with all this density and the layers that we're designing, it will help to push out birds like Indian miners, which are much more focused on gardens with an open structure and lawn and trees, which unfortunately is what a lot of our gardens provide as habitat structure. Cash has put in sweet Baccaria is great. Yes, it is really great. That's one of our local Indigenous plants that is a very important source of nectar for lots of insects and therefore lots of birds as well being attracted to it. So absolutely with you on that one, Cash. And finally, design quiet places to sit and watch the garden, including from indoors. Lastly, here, just a note on placing chickens. We need to visit them every day. So that means that anything along the path to the chickens, like maybe veggies, for example, is going to get extra attention. Chickens have got to have secure fox-proof housing and cool, sheltered areas to protect them from afternoon sun. We don't need to go to the full chicken run every day. We just need to go to the house. So that can affect the way that we place it. I like to have them near veggie patches so that you can throw snails to them. Chook grade greens can get to them really easily. And quite often we design them with fruit trees as a chook orchard system so that the benefits of chickens, so as pest management, cleaning up fallen fruit, etc., fertilizing, can go to the trees more easily. And the trees can provide shelter. And chickens are quite noisy as well, which is important to keep in mind. But actually being able to listen to them can sometimes tell you when something's wrong. Okay. Whoop. Okay, jumping around. Should use my mouse properly. So here's the site analysis summary. One more time, just a quick refresh. And now I'm just going to talk about how I designed Mulberry House and give you a bit of a sense of how this can all come together. So, I actually made notes as I was doing this design. So one of the things that I just noted at the very beginning is that in the site analysis summary, there was only really one spot that had full sun all year, which is this area. And generally speaking, good sun was limited in the backyard to along the southern fence line. And so annual veggies, even though I don't usually think about them first, we need to sort of bookmark that in our minds and make sure that we don't overwrite that as we're going through. The first thing I thought about was the water tank. This is best in shade. It helps the tank to last longer. We want it to be near a downpipe with good catchment, good access to the garden where we intend to use it. And I ended up, while I actually had a few areas in mind, including the area I've got my mouse on, this area close to the house uh, ended up being a bit too close for maintenance and also would have meant a much reduced tank size. So I scrapped that one and ended up thinking the tank somewhere in this area to connect with a downpipe, which is got the most catchment in this corner of the house. I wasn't initially sure about the location, but after placing some of the other elements, then I came back to it and was able to confirm it. So one strategy, if you're not sure, is to just think about a few possible locations and then go down your list and see if you can use that to confirm the position. So for the next one, the trampoline, it needs to be in the backyard, ideally for easy supervision and safety, but you don't want it to block access to the rest of the garden. You don't want it to dominate the view or the best growing area. And also summer protection from sun is really good. And so what I suggested for that one is that we try and tuck it underneath the ornamental pear tree. Make sure there's a cover for bird poo. It's a good tip. But yeah, prune the ornamental pear and tuck the trampoline under it. And then it's part of an area which is close to the kids' natural play zone of the mulberry house and the tree as well. The other structures I wanted to talk about were the bikes. We could lock them on the front veranda, but it's quite awkward to get the e-bike up there and make tight turns. And they're best under a shed, and having a shed would take up prime growing area. So if I put it in the southern area, so it's implying it goes somewhere in this northern side here. Really, we want the shortest possible pathway and an area for easy turnaround with the e-bike. And so we ended up thinking possibly we can talk to neighbours and maybe leverage the brick wall, which is already there, to create kind of a not particularly expensive shelter. And so bike storage in this area up here is the suggestion. And then any roof space there can also add more catchment for the tank in the nearby growing area. The washing line needs to have all year sun, pretty good airflow. It's worth thinking about new locations, but the area that it's currently in does make a lot of sense. Screening it would be nice. It's not particularly attractive. So possibly thinking about some screening, but the clothesline makes sense where it already is. Now we've got grey water that can come out of the house in the bottom southern eastern corner here, and that can quite easily flow along this fence area, but also the need for a windbreak from the south and a winter windbreak at that, which means we want leaves on the trees in winter. That all kind of implies we have some evergreen fruit trees along this fence. Evergreen fruit trees, of course, really good because they can absorb grey water all year. They citrus, for example, and feijoa. So that's all kind of pointing towards an evergreen fruit tree shelter belt in this area. Um, then I don't know if you saw in the photos, but there's sort of an accessible concrete ramp here, which is this pathway you can see in the aerial image. And when you walk down it, it kind of feels like you've arrived somewhere. So there's a really natural gathering space in this area. And of course, in summer, it's lovely being in the shade of these trees, but in winter, the shade's quite deep. So you really would find yourself wanting to spend time in this southern area here. So it does naturally make sense. This is going to be your gathering area, your social area. And this then also, of course, doubles when you're not having an adult gathering as kids' play space next to the trampoline and the mulberry cubby and the little forested zone. Then back to those annual veggies. As we know, they need about 6 hours of sun all year, but protection from the afternoon sun is quite an advantage. There is an existing raised bed, which you can see up here. And interestingly, I measured it, and it turns out it's exactly the right length to fit alongside this concrete ramp. Um, and so having a raised bed also avoids concerns about ledge, possibly, close to the house in particular, in the drip line of this old weatherboard house. And here it's got really ideal access. It's so easy for the people living in the house to pop out, grab veggies, and pop back in, even when the grass is wet and everything's cold in winter. So the veggie patch is popping in there. And then if the family decide they've got extra effort, extra capacity, I should say, for growing veggies, then there's potential for them to put some more veggies in front of the evergreen fruit trees along the edges of the social area in the future. Herbs, not sure if I've actually marked them in here, but easy to grow around the edges of the veggie bed as well, and they've got a few extra raised beds they can move in. Temperate trees or deciduous trees need the sun in summer, but they can get burnt quite easily. So they prefer a little bit of afternoon shade, but they can deal with quite a lot of shade in winter. So we want to try and squeeze in a couple of other fruit trees. but space is getting a little bit limited here. So there was a suggestion of espaliering them along this pathway into the house. I know it looks quite crowded there, but there is actually space as long as they're well espaliered without blocking access to the garden. In this way, you could actually grow them quite tall. You can quite safely use a step ladder on this very stable concrete pathway. And if you allow them to get a little bit taller, then we can use them to shade that very reflective wall there, which is so glary in the summertime as well. Okay, so coming towards the end, there's a few other things, but I'm shortening it for brevity. Compost can slot quite easily in amongst the evergreen fruit trees, and that way any nutrients that leach from the compost go into feeding citrus and feijoa trees as well. And chooks, they don't use the garden shed to its full potential. So in the future, the chook shed could be built in this area here, maybe multifunction as a chook and tool shed. And those chooks can be then able to be in a run that will span some of these fruit trees as well when they're let out into it. Yeah. Okay, so that just gives you just, and I know there'll be lots of questions on that and the details and so on, but that gives you a sense for how we can kind of move through a design in an order and respond to it using the site analysis and the previous assessments that we've done. So finally, to confirm that the design is right, what we want to do is go back and check our vision statement and check that it brings to life that vision and that it feels inevitable that, you know, that vision will take place with our design. We want to go back through all of our site analysis and make sure that it doesn't clash with anything in particular. And I also recommend people go out into the garden and actually mark it out on the ground. Even get some stakes, bang them in where you want trees, actually mock it up and then walk through it and see if it actually makes sense and feels right. There's a lot more checks, but these are the basic ones I think for people getting started. So here's a really simple sketch that I drew up for the mates, showing you those arrangements in place there. Yeah, you don't need to overthink it, but yeah, just a little bit of planning there will help make sure that you have a good starting point for your design. So lastly, once we've got everything in position and not before, then we start doing our detailed design, which is where you'd measure up, get quotes, really start to then think about specific trees, costings and so forth. But really what we want to do is design in stages so that you don't get too far ahead of yourself and you can observe and make changes as you learn. So I thought I'd finish. I'll just show you the first stage of Mulberry House with the veggie bed moved into position. I've just hidden some children behind chickens and caterpillars, but there's a trampoline that's been moved into position, which is working nicely. There's some new fruit trees planted, and as a happy ending, that's the first annual crops in that garden bed, looking pretty pumping in there. So very happy family. Anyway, we're right on time. I realize there's some questions and I'm happy to stay for them, but I will end the official side of things there and hand back to Lee. And yeah, just thank you all so much for your time. And I really hope that that gives you a sense for the very kind of broad brushstrokes approach of how we get a garden design that makes sense so that you can get more value and more joy from these spaces.
Lots of appreciative reactions there, and really, and in the messages as well. And big thank you to Kat, because that was just an amazing session. Covered so much ground and really gave such a coherent process for how to really go about getting that vision and building the garden to fulfill it. So really appreciate it, Kat. And I've just sent that link for people to, as a reminder that there's all sorts of workshops that go into detail around this. as well as monthly tips that we share with you. So really you can build your knowledge bit by bit around this stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, we're right on 8:30.
That's
So
right.
unless it's a real burning question, we might leave it there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I did want to say, like, every one of those
Mm,
topics, chickens, habitat gardens, compost, water, things like that, there's
yeah,
sessions in My Smart Garden that go into those in detail. But what we don't often get to do is go, right, well, where would make sense at your place to put those things? So I'm hoping
mm,
the session has given you an idea of how we really get that optimal arrangement where you live, by paying attention to those sorts of details at the start. Yeah.
exactly. Well done, Kat, and thank you everybody for coming. And we'll see you and have a great evening. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye bye.